Alright, we're going to learn about scatter plots. No, not scatterbrained, scatter plots. And scatter plots they show how two sets of data are related on a coordinate plane or on a graph. Sometimes the data are unrelated and sometimes they're very strongly related. Let's take for example, so our example is time studying versus your grade on a test. Do you think these two things are related? Well, sure, they're definitely related. And what would you expect to happen? Maybe the more you study, the higher your grade will be. Now, while studying doesn't always give you an A+, it's definitely going to improve your chances of doing well. So, with scatter plots, you need to think of the majority of the data. In other words, what's the general trend? So for example, if we drew a sketch of that, and I would like for you to do that, the time studying versus the test grade, and we can arrange these words on either axis, but I really want to measure the test grade, so I'm going to put that on the y-axis. That's this one. And on the x-axis, I'm putting the time studying. So just think, the more that you study, so let's say somebody who didn't study at all, maybe they made a grade like this. Somebody who studied a little more, maybe they made a higher grade. A little bit more, they made a higher grade. This person studied harder, but maybe they didn't have enough background beforehand. So this isn't always going to be a perfect line as you draw this sketch. So keep that in mind. That's why it's called scatter. It's a scatter plot. They're not making a straight line because they're real life data. But wouldn't you agree is the more you study, if that goes up, the higher grade you get. Or the less you study, the lower the grade is. The lower the grade you get, excuse me. So as one thing goes up, the other goes up. As one goes down, the other goes down. So they're directly related. And that leads us into our next note. There are three types of scatter plots. And actually there's a little more, but there are three basic types. So the first type, it's like the one we just talked about. It's positive. And if you could just draw some dots arranged like so, just going upwards from left to right, that shows an example of a positive scatter plot. So as one thing goes up, the other goes up, or as one goes down, the other goes down. All right, our second type is going to be a negative. And as you might have guessed, this is going to go downhill or have a negative slope. So our first one has a positive slope. I'm also going to write that down for our first example. So positive slope. And our negative, as one thing goes up, the other goes down. Or as one thing goes down, the other goes up for a negative correlation. So that has a negative slope. And our last example is going to be no correlation. And that's when the points that seem like are just kind of arranged randomly with no rhyme or reason. All right, so as one thing goes up, the other thing, we have no clue what it's doing. So these are unrelated. So the three types of correlation are positive, negative, and no correlation. All right, we just discussed that studying yields a positive correlation with test grade. Can you think of a negative correlation? What about precipitation and flooding? The more precipitation or the rain that you get, does that mean the more flooding you get or the less flooding? I would say as precipitation goes up, flooding goes up. Whereas precipitation goes down, flooding goes down. So these are going to be positive. It's a positive correlation. I'm going to abbreviate that CORR period for positive correlation. All right, let's hit up another example. That was example 1. All right, what about your shoe size and your IQ? Are those related, and if so, how? So the bigger your shoe size, does that mean the smarter you are? Well, gee, I'd like to think so since I have a pretty big shoe size, but unfortunately that's not the case. So these are not going to be related. There are plenty of people that have small shoe sizes that are extremely intelligent, and vice versa. So this is going to be no correlation. We just kicked that idea out, so no correlation. They're not related. All right, next example. All right, example 3, the distance from the equator and the average temperature. So think about it. The further you go away from the equator, let's say up here, what does that mean about your temperature? Well, that's going to be places like Alaska or maybe the North Pole or the South Pole. They're way colder, so the temperature is going to be down or lower. And couldn't we say that the closer you get to the equator, so if your distance is small, that would mean a low number, then what would happen to your temperature? If you were closer to that equator, maybe like Hawaii or Jamaica, then you are talking about being a much higher temperature. Okay, so these are definitely going to be directly related in that as one goes up, the other goes down. So what's that called? Negative. So that would be a negative correlation. And I know what you're thinking. Come on, summertime. Me too. And also people who live near the equator experience much less seasonal change. And people further away see a greater fluctuation. All right, our last topic for today is to interpret points on a scatter plot. So if you have graph paper, you need to make just a simple sketch with me. So let's call the x-axis the time spent practicing. And then the y-axis can be the number of shots made. And now we're just going to plot a couple points here. Why don't we go right 2, up 1, right 4, up 3, right 1, up 0, and how about right 3, up 4? And I'm going to do one more. Right 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, up 5. Now we have 5 points that are graphed. Now I'm going to label each of my hash marks here will represent 2 shots made. So 2, 4, 6, 8, and I'm going to go all the way up to 10. And then for time practicing, each one of those will just represent 1. So, and this is in hours. So 1, 2, 3, 4, we'll go up to 5 there. All right, let's just answer a couple questions based on our graph. First off, when did someone make 2 shots? And you can see from the graph, 2 shots is going to be reading that y-axis, the number of shots made. So that's 2 right here at the first hash mark, which would be that point. Now, when did this happen? Well, the time practice is in hours, so that goes 1, 2, so that's at 2 hours. All right, another question for you. All right, copy down number 2. What was the number of most shots made, and when did this happen? All right. So the number of most shots made. So in other words, what's our maximum Y value that we got? Because that's shots made. And look up here, right there at 10, that's our maximum. So 10 is going to be our first answer. So 10 shots. And then our second answer is, when did this happen? Well, now I'm just going to read from that point. I'm going to read over to the x-axis. So going down, that's going to be 4 hours. So that point represents 10 shots in 4 hours. And one more question I have for you, is that going to be a positive correlation or a negative correlation? And I think you figured it out as one thing goes up, the other goes up. So that's going to be a positive correlation. All right, now that you have those 3 questions written down, you are on the road to sinking this shot, the scatter plot shot. And the scatter plot shot, blue, now you're on your road to success. Way to go, guys. Oh no, they're scattering everywhere.